Vindaya Susirivaya.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So today is the disappearance day of Sri Ramananda Roy. So the class will be based on his life and his participation, contribution to our awareness of what Krishna service is. Je anilo premadhana karuna pracho je anilo premadhana karuna pracho Jeno pravakota jena acharya Thakur. Kamora sarupa Rasanatha Rasarupa Rasanatha Rasanatha Patita Pavan Amora Vatayuga Nakavira ekagale kotagela gorana tara Ashane kutivo mata anale pasivo Goranga gonera nidi kota gele pavo Esava sangira sange ye koilo vilan ya sange ye koilo vilan te sangona vaya kane narota madan Napaya kane naro damadan Ye anilo premadana karuna prachur Nilo premadana karuna prachur Eno bravo kota kela charya thakur kota kela charya thakur Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Ramananda Thakur, 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 Jaya Ramananda Thakur. Haribo, 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 Nitai Gora, Haribo, 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 Nitai Gora, Haribo. So this song is in our songbook. This bhajan by Narottam Das Thakur is on the last page. It's page 78. And this is something that is sung whenever we commemorate the disappearance of a very exalted personality. So now we're going to read the translation. We can read it together. If you want to get yourselves a book, it's on page 78. He who brought the treasure of divine love, and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasa Acharya gone? Where are my Svarupa Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottama Das simply weeps. So this is a cry from the soul to be again reunited in the association of pure devotees. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyanatimirandasya Kanchana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yaham Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manavishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Payarupa Palantam Susat Suratlam Palamtikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namaskate Kanchana Gauravi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vaishnavana Satyadevi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpataru Yasya Kripa Sindhu Vacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this exalted personality. And I will be reading from the Gaudiya history, ISKCON Desire certain excerpts about Srila Ramananda Roy. But before I begin, I'm going to start from the very end. And if I get a chance at the very end to repeat this, then it'll be wonderful. So, but I would like, what I would like to read is the bottom line of the topmost instruction that Lord Chaitanya gave to Srila Ramananda Roy and Sri Svarupa Madhar Goswami. Through Ramananda Roy and Sri Svarupa Damodar Goswami, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu joyfully announced to the world that Harinam Sankirtan is the best means to attain love of God in this age of pearl. The Lord, this is now quoting from the Chaitanya Charitamrita Antyalila, chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. The Lord, in a wave of jubilation, says, "Listen, Svarupa Damodar and Ramananda Roy. In the age of Kali, Harinam Sankirtan is the supreme means of deliverance. In the age of Kali, Krishna is to be worshipped by the congregational chanting of his holy names. This is the way that an intelligent person attains the lotus feet of Krishna." I'll repeat it. The Lord, in a wave of jubilation, says, "Listen, Svarupa Damodar and Ramananda Roy. In the age of Kali, Harinam Sankirtan is the supreme means of deliverance. In the age of Kali, Krishna is to be worshipped by the congregational chanting of his holy names. This is the way that an intelligent person attains the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. Through the chanting of the holy name, all of one's sinful reactions are extinguished, and all auspiciousness arises until finally one experiences the joy of love for Krishna. Again, this is from Sri Antya-lila, chapter 20, verses 8, 9, 10, and 11. So let's hear a little bit about who this personality is and some of these very, very super excellent attributes. In the second biography, in the Ramananda Roy story in the Gaudiya history, ISKCON Desartri, there is a verse from the Gaura Ganodesh Tipika. There's one from the Padma Purana. This one is from the Gaura Ganodesha Tipika, verses 120 to 124, where it says, there are two Arjunas in Krishna Lila. One is the Priya Narma Saka in Vraj, which is a Saka, a friend of Krishna at the highest level, Priya Narma. The other one is of the Pandavas. These two combined to become Ramananda Roy, the dear companion of Mahaprabhu. He was very knowledgeable in the teachings of loving devotion to Radha and Krishna, which he described to Gaurachandra on a daily basis. So here we have Ramananda Roy describing all the super excellent information to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but not just information, it's realization about the super excellent levels of divine love. Some people say that Ramananda Roy was Lalita Saki, while others do not. Mahaprabhu himself told Bhavananda Roy that Bhavananda Roy was the father, that he was Pandu, the husband of Kunti and the father of the Pandavas. The Pandava Arjuna also united with the gopi named Arjuniya. Thus, the most aware say that Ramananda Roy combined all these three personalities. Proof of this is found in the Padma Purana, where it is stated that the Pandava Arjuna became the gopi Arjuniya. So these are these mysteries or different personalities combining together to come up with a very super excellent servant of the Supreme Lord. As stated in these verses from Gaura Ganodesh Tipika, some people hold that Ramananda Roy was an incarnation of Lalita. Some others are of the opinion that he was Vishaka. In his commentary on Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, so now in our line, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the same love which Vishaka had for Radha and Krishna Braj, and that love which Radha and Krishna had for Vishaka, awakened in them when they met. In other words, when Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy met, this love that Vishaka had for the divine couple and the divine couple had for Vishaka awakened in both of them. Thus, it is clear that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur saw Ramananda Roy as Vishaka. Normally, we understand that's Varuv Damodar, that is Lalita, and Ramananda Roy is Vishaka. There are other opinions. Ramananda Roy was one of the Lord's 3.5 most intimate associates. Extremely important that Lord Chaitanya had 3.5 the most intimate associates. And one of them was Ramananda Roy. And the other two were, maybe somebody would like to mention the names? Sarup Damodar and Siki Mahiti. And then there was a fourth one, which is half a devotee or half an associate, and that was Siki Mahiti's sister. The Lord accepted Siki Mahiti's sister as one of Radha's friends. In the entire world, there were only 3.5 devotees who were so worthy. So we're hearing about Ramananda Roy, how extremely worthy he was of the association of Lord Chaitanya, and how he was there during the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya and the last pastimes of Lord Chaitanya before he left. They were Swarup Damodar, Ramananda Roy, Siki Mahiti, and his sister. So, social status of Ramananda. Ramananda Roy's father was named Bhavananda Roy, and he was told to have been Pandu. He was born in a family of the arisen Karana caste, an administrative clan like the Kayastas He was previously King Pandu, and he had 5 sons, of whom Ramananda was the oldest. He lived in Alalanath. The family lived in Alalanath, about 12 miles west of Puri. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has summarized some details of the account of this family in his Anubhasha and has come to the conclusion that Orishan society considers the Karana community to be part of the Shudra caste. So Ramananda Roy considered himself a member of the Shudra caste. Ramananda Roy was born into this community. Nevertheless, though he was considered by society to be a Shudra by birth, he was de facto a Brahmin. Indeed, as a Vaishnava Paramahamsa, he was the spiritual master to the Brahmins. It's explained that Vaishnava is beyond the qualities of the material nature, whether one is a Brahman or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra or below that. It doesn't matter when it comes to spiritual life, because we're not, we're living our spiritual lives in the sense that we understand that we are not the body, that we are the living soul within the body. And a Vaishnava is beyond any kind of designations. And so Lord Chaitanya had as a supermost excellent companion Srila Ramananda Roy, who was supposedly not a Brahmin, even though he was a super excellent Vaishnava. And of course, we know about Haridas Thakur. He was born in a family of Muslims, and he was an intimate associate of the Supreme Lord. Anyone who considers the devotee in terms of his birth or race is destined for a hellish existence. So we have to supersede this kind of understanding that we have of the caste and how we belong to a certain caste, and somebody else within the devotional community belongs to a different caste, because we're all servants of the Supreme Lord. And in the Padma Purana, I won't read the Sanskrit, it is expressed in the following manner. Anyone who considers the deity to be nothing but stone, the Guru to be an ordinary human being, or the Vaishnava to be a member of a particular caste or race, who takes the holy water which has washed Vishnu or the Vaishnava's feet and can destroy all the sins of the age of Kali to be ordinary water, who thinks that the name or mantra of Vishnu, which destroys all evils, is the same as any other sound, or who takes Vishnu to be the same as anything other than him, he has a hellish nature. So let's be realistic and apply these principles and purify our consciousness by just understanding that respect to all living entities is one of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the teachings in the Vedas, Lord Krishna himself. According to the Bhajan Nirnaya, Ramananda was the disciple of Raghavendra Puri and the grand disciple of Madhavendra Puri. So how did these two great personalities, the Supreme Lord himself and Ramananda Roy, get to meet? They got to meet because Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya tells the Lord about Ramananda and explains to him that there is no other person that knows more about the Madhurya Rasa and the pastimes, the intimate pastimes of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. As Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was departing, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya submitted the following at his Lord's feet. My Lord, you must fulfill this request of mine. In the town of Vidyanagar, on the bank of the Godavari, there is a responsible government officer named Ramananda Roy. Please do not neglect him, thinking he belongs to Shudra family engaged in materialistic activities. Please take my word for it that you should meet him without fail. If anyone is fit to associate with you, it is he. No other devotee can compare with him in knowledge of the divine sentiments. He has attained the highest limits of learning as well as being experienced in the science of devotional sentiments. If you converse with him, you will recognize his exalted character. So we need to remember that he was governor, that he had been assigned to this post by the king Prataparudra, and that he was engaged in political affairs, managing and organizing, but that he was actually a very exalted Rasika Vaishnava, that he was a very learned personality, and he also was a poet and a playwright. In talking to him, you will also acknowledge his greatness. And this is a quote from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 7, verses 61 to 67. This is the last one, verse 67. And Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has commented as follows. To superficial understanding, Ramananda Roy was not a sannyasi wearing a loincloth. In common understanding, those who are courtiers engaged in government service are materialistic. But Ramananda Roy was in fact a learned person and in fact a sannyasi as a perfected human being. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had previously been able to recognize his natural qualities as a Vaishnava, even though he himself, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, was not a Vaishnava at the time. When he took to devotional service by the grace of the Lord, he recognized his opinion of Ramananda and realized the extent of his qualifications, calling him an Adhikari Rasika Bhakta, the most highly qualified authority in the matters of devotional sentiment. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was the incarnation of Brihaspati and the court pandit of King Prataparudra. He was very learned, and even though he was a householder, he had sannyasis who were his disciples. He had been unable to recognize that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the Supreme Lord himself, nor had he been able to identify Ramananda Roy as his most intimate associate. But as I read a couple of seconds ago, once he took up the process of pure bhakti, he was able to identify the nature of the Supreme Lord and the nature of the super excellent servant Ramananda Roy. So Mahaprabhu went to the south. He was on his tour of the south, blessing the inhabitants of the land by bestowing devotion to Krishna on them. He visited many places. I'll skip this. And then he went to the Godavari River, which in his vision was the Yamuna, and the woods on its banks, Vrindavan. He joyfully crossed the river and came to the place known as Kabura, where he bathed in the river, hoping to meet Ramananda Roy. Coming out of the water, he sat down and waited for him. At the same time, Ramananda Roy passed by with a fanfare. He was with his entourage. When he saw Mahaprabhu's supernatural form, he descended from his palanquin and paid his obeisances to the Lord. Though Mahaprabhu recognized him, he asked him to identify himself. Ramananda replied that he was nothing but a lowly Shudra servant. When the Lord heard him speak in this humble manner, he immediately embraced him. Both the Lord and his servant felt the onset of divine emotions, and both experienced the 8 ecstatic transformations of prema, sattvic bhavas. The Brahmins who were accompanying Ramananda were astonished to see such a display, because they thought, how can this sannyasi hug a Shudra? It's unheard of. It's not recommended in the scriptures. Actually, it is forbidden. And he's crying. At the same time, he's embracing this Shudra. But the governor, Ramananda's scholar, normally very serious, why has he become so emotional upon being touched by this sannyasi as though intoxicated? So we have the Chaitanya Charitamrita where all these pastimes are being explained. And this one in particular, this section, is from Madhya Lila, chapter 8. Chapter 8 is the most important one when it comes to the conversation between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy, the Ramananda Sambad. seeing that they were outsiders present, the Lord controlled his emotions and told Ramananda that he had been told by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to seek him out. And Ramananda replied with humility, "This is the proof of your mercy to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. You have touched me, an untouchable, simply due to his love for you. What a difference exists between us. You are the Supreme Lord, Narayan himself, and I, a government servant interested in materialistic activities. Indeed, I am the lowest amongst men of the fourth class. Even so, you were not contemptuous of my touch, neither did you fear the Vedic injunctions which forbid one to even look upon a Shudra. Your mercy makes you touch me, even though this activity is condemned by scripture and by society. Who can understand your intentions, for you are the Supreme Lord himself?" Okay. Now, what happens that the Brahmins who were in part of the entourage going with Ramananda Roy were so touched, and even though they criticized the fact that Lord Chaitanya was touching a Shudra, they felt an insurge of bhakti, and they too were influenced by the sight of the Lord and began to chant the names of Krishna. It's interesting because these Brahmins were not pure bhakti devotees, but with this upsurge of bhakti in their heart, being able to witness this exchange of love between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy, this was the first thing they did. They started to chant the name of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And with tremulous voices, filled with divine ecstasy. That's how they were chanting the name of Krishna. Ramananda Roy said aloud that Mahaprabhu was the Supreme Lord, both in akriti or form and in prakriti or nature. The Lord immediately responded in a way that would show the greatness of his devotee. The greatness of his devotee is also shown very clearly in the fact that Lord Chaitanya was the person, when they had the conversations, that was asking the questions, and he was enabling Ramananda Roy to give these super excellent answers and this knowledge, divine knowledge, to the Supreme Lord. No, it wasn't the other way around. The Lord said, "You're a great devotee," to Ramananda Roy. "Indeed, you're the best amongst all. All those who behold you are immediately affected, so that their hearts melt. What to speak of others? I am a Mayavadi sannyasi, yet I feel the onset of Krishna prema when I touch you." This again is from Madhya 8. And now the Lord is going to listen to Ramananda speak. He said, "I'm going to continue my way south. I will return later, and then we can get together. But please come and meet with me this evening." Ordinarily, it is seen that the devotee, before Lord Chaitanya decides to continue on his way south, ordinarily it is seen that the devotee asks the questions and the Lord answers. This time, however, the roles were reversed, and the Lord asked Ramananda to clarify certain spiritual truths, and then empowered him to respond. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami makes this explicit in the verse which opens the 8th chapter of the Madhya Lila. This is the very first verse of this chapter 8. I'll skip the Sanskrit. Gauranga is like the ocean of spiritual truths. He filled the cloud named Ramananda with the nectar of the purest conclusions of devotion to himself. Ramananda then rained down that same nectar on the very ocean from which it had come, producing the jewels of transcendental knowledge. This is introducing the chapter saying that this is going to be what's going to happen in Madhya Lila, chapter 8, the conversation where the Supreme Lord is empowering Lord Ramananda Roy to come up with the most super excellent answers to his questions, filled with divine love and divine sentiments. Mahaprabhu asked Ramananda Roy to explain to him with evidence from the scriptures the ultimate goal of life. And Ramananda started his response by explaining that devotion to Vishnu was the ultimate aim of human achievement, or sadhya, the goal. So I'm going to read now specifically, not from here, but from the city itself. These verses, they're extremely important for us to know. I was seeing yesterday a clip of Srila Prabhupada, who was in his bed just before he left our vision. And he was talking about, may have been a day or 2 days before, how important it is and how necessary it is if we want to actually pursue the path of devotion without deviation and without being distracted or confused, to read his books. And Srila Prabhupada was saying how he put so much time and effort to produce these books for us to read, to study, to become immersed in this knowledge and to derive realizations from the reading. So I'll go back to the book now. And please remember that we have a trove of super excellent literatures that Srila Prabhupada shed his blood to read, to translate, and to write the commentaries on, for us to benefit. And he said, if they don't read the books, what else can I do? I've come here to give everything, but if they don't read my books, what else can I do for them? Lord Chaitanya said to Ramananda Roy, as long as I live, I shall find it impossible to give up your company. You and I shall remain together at Jagannath Puri. That is when Lord Chaitanya comes back from the South tour, and he's telling him ahead of time, we'll be together in Jagannath Puri. We will pass our time together in joy, talking about Krishna and his pastimes. And after that, they both departed to perform their respective duties. And then Ramananda Roy returned to see Lord Chaitanya. Thus they met time and time again, sitting in a secluded place and jubilantly discussing devotional service by the question and answer process. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked the questions. This is Madhya Lila chapter 8 verses 243, starting with 243. This is 244 now. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked the questions and Sri Ramananda Roy gave the answers. In this way, they were engaged in discussion throughout the night. On one occasion, the Lord inquired, of all types of education, which is the most important? Ramananda Roy replied, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. Nothing else is important. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then asked Ramananda Roy, out of all glorious activities, which is the most glorious? Ramananda Roy replied, that person who is reputed to be a devotee of Lord Krishna enjoys the utmost fame and glory. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, of the many capitalists who possess great riches, who is the topmost? Ramananda Roy replied, he who is richest in love for Radha and Krishna is the greatest capitalist. Thank you. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, of all kinds of distress, what is the most painful? Sri Ramananda Roy replied, what did he say? You all know this. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Ramananda Roy replied, apart from separation from the devotee of Krishna, I know of no unbearable unhappiness. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then inquired, out of all liberated persons, who should be accepted as the greatest? Ramananda Roy replied, he who has love for Krishna has attained the topmost liberation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu next asked Ramananda Roy, among many songs, which song is to be considered the actual religion of the living entity? Ramananda Roy replied, that song describing the loving affairs of Sri Radha and Krishna is superior to all other songs. Then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all auspicious and beneficial activities, which is best for the living entity? Ramananda Roy replied, the only auspicious activity is association with the devotees of Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, what should all living entities constantly remember? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief objects of remembrance are always the Lord's holy name, qualities, and pastimes. And we have access. You can read the Srimad Bhagavatam and read all about the Supreme Lord, the holy name, qualities, and pastimes. And interesting because if you are familiar with the very, very last verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, let's come to this chapter, last verse, it's all about Harinam Sankirtan. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu further inquired, out of many types of meditation, which is required for all living entities? Srila Ramananda Roy replied, the chief duty of every living entity is to meditate upon the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, where should the living entity live, abandoning all other places? Ramananda Roy replied, he should live in the holy place known as Vrindavan or Brajabhumi, where the Lord performed his rasa dance. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all topics people listen to, which is the best for all living entities? Ramananda Roy replied, hearing about the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna is most pleasing to the ear. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, and this is verse 256. Please remember this verse. Madhya Lila, chapter 8, 256. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, among all worshipable objects, which is the chief? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief worshipable object is the holy name of Radha and Krishna, the Hare Krishna mantra. And it goes on. But now that we have only, 3 minutes left? 2 minutes left? Okay, there's so much information on Ramananda Roy, so sweet and so delectable. So it's all available. We all have access to it. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ramananda in the Lord's last days. When the Lord was in his condition of divine ecstatic madness, he would sometimes disappear from his chambers, even though there were 3 barred doors through which he had to pass in order to go outside. At that time, he was living in the Gambira, right? Once he was found near the Lion's Gate, his joints loosened and taking on a giant distended form. He was revived and returned to normal by loud singing of the holy names. On another occasion, he was found in the sand dunes, which he had taken in his state of trance to be Govardhan. Once again, he was pacified by Sankirtan and returned to his home. On these occasions, Ramananda Roy was present with Svarup Damodar. Remember, they were accompanying the Supreme Lord, the most intimate associates, throughout the 10 transformations of the Lord's ecstatic madness, Divyan Mada. Ramananda Roy would recite verses which were fit for the Lord's emotional state. In this way, he brought pleasure to the Lord, hearing and chanting, hearing and chanting. The pastimes of the Supreme Lord, Shravanam, Hiranam, Kirtanam, Shravanam, Kirtanam, and then Vishnu Smaranam. Mahaprabhu remained in Nilachala in this way, passing the days and nights absorbed in the anxiety of separation from Krishna. Svarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy were always with him, bringing him ecstasy with their recitation of songs and verses appropriate to his mood. The Lord took Svarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy by the shoulders and said, listen, Svarup and jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.
Tamaham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami Enam Kanvandam Maravindadalayatakam Bharavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam Kandar Bhagom Vidamaniya Vishesha Shobham Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami Angani yasa sakalen Priya Priti Manti Vasyanti Panti Kayanti Chiram Naganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadhu Jala Vigrahasya Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham bhajami 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 Radha Krishna Krishna Pranamora Jugala Kishore Radha Krishna Divane Marane Gati Aranahi Mo Divane Marane Gati Aranahi Mo Radha Krishna Pranamora युगाला किसो जीवने मरणे गति अरनाहि मो जीवने मरणे गति अरनाहि मो कलिंदिरा कुले केले kadambirawana dera kule kele kadambirawana atana bedira upar basa bodu jana Anabit upar bosa bodu jana Shama gori ange dibo Jandane raganda Maran Chamara dulabo kabe erimu kacanda araka Gatia malatir mala dibutu hargale ya tirmala dibutu hargale आधारे तुलिबो दिबो कर्पुला तंबुले आधारे तुलिबो दिबो कर्पुला तंबुले Lalita Visaka Adi Jata Saki Vrinda Tavisaka Adi Jata Saki Vrinda Agnaya Karibo Seva Charana Ravinda Aya Karibo Seva Charana Ravinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Dasi Anudat Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Dasi Anudat Seva Vilasa Kore Narotama Das
their dark and fair forms with sandalwood paste, scented with chuya, and I will fan them with a chamar of whisk. After stringing together garlands of multi flowers, I will place them around their necks, and I will offer tambula scented with camphor to their lotus mouths. With the permission of all the Sakis, headed by Lalita and Vishaka, I will serve the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. Narottam Das, the servant of Sri Prabhu, belongs to Sri Narottam Das Thakur ki jai. Chaitodarpanam marjanam bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam Shreya Kairavya Chandrika Vitaranam Vijavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipanam Pranamrita Swadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrapita Niyamita Smaranena Kala Etadrishita Vakripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaiva Midrishami Hajjani Nanuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Suhishuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Va Jagadishakamaye Mama Janmani Janmani Ishvare Bhavatad Bhaktir Hoita Kitwai Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Babam Buddha Kripayata Vapada Pankaja Stita Duli Sajashimba Chintaya Nayanam Yatam Namishena Chakshusha Pravashayatam Shunayatam Jagat Sarvam Govindam Ashlishavapadapadam Ranastumam Adarshanam Marmahata Karotuva Yatatadava